The Wendat people, who the Europeans called the Huron, practiced a special burial ceremony. They dug out individual graves, cleaned each of the bones thoroughly, and had a celebration where they dug, and then they filled the trench with the mixed bones. The mound was created when the earth was laid on top to cover those bones. These mounds can be found in different areas across Toronto, and when you encounter one, it's important to remember that you are in the presence of a sacred space. Today, I'm speaking to you from Guelph, which is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and mixed ancestry people. Today, I recognize the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe people. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and people, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect on the traditional territory I'm speaking to you from today. It is my wish that we can carry of peace, friendship, and respect into this special gathering today. I thank generations of people who were stewards of this land for thousands of years before my family settled here. And thank you for listening. I also want to mention that I am going to introduce our president, Karen Littlewood, in a second, but I want you to know that you are able to talk to panelists through the chat, and you can ask questions at the end with the Q&A button, or with the Q&A button, and we'll be able to see your question and answer it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Karen Littlewood, who is the brand new trial by fire president of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. So Karen is a special education teacher originally from Barrie, and she was born in Barrie and received her Bachelor of Science in Languages at Laurentian University and completed her Bachelor of Education with Nipissing University. She started her career as an elementary teacher in York Region before moving back to Simcoe County in 2000. In 2007, Karen became a secondary teacher for the Simcoe County District School Board, where she taught life skills and special education. Karen became the president of both the district and the teacher bargaining unit for District 17 Simcoe, and held a number of other roles both locally and provincially, including vice chair of our provincial council, chair of our Communications and Political Action Committee, as well as other positions. In addition, she was a member of the Barrie and District Labour Council, and she was elected as an executive officer in 2017, and then as vice president in 2019. Karen is an advocate of clear and open communications within OSSTF, as well as within the public when it comes to education issues. And she's committed to working to enact and support equity and anti-oppression, as well as addressing systemic barriers within the Federation and our communities. She's a strong promoter of equity issues within OSSTF and beyond, and believes in the importance of building coalitions to effect positive change at all levels of education and within the labor movement. As only the 11th female president of OSSTF in its history, Karen recognizes the important role she's taking on and seeks to be a strong role model for women and for others in the organization who do not see themselves reflected in leadership. She's also a very strong advocate in her community as well, and we're very happy that she's agreed to help us moderate this wonderful panel discussion today. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you everyone for being here. And I'm going to turn off my camera now to save some internet. So have a great meeting.
Thanks for the introduction, Tracy. It's greatly appreciated. It really is my privilege, though, to be here and to moderate this. And when Tracy said, would you like to moderate? I said, absolutely, I really would. I am in Toronto right now. I am from Barrie, but I'm on the traditional lands of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. And I'm actually in a building right in the distillery district. And when you go outside of my building, there's a mark in the pavement that says original shoreline of Lake Ontario. And I see that, and I give thanks for the water and the people who have appreciated the water before me, And I give thanks for the air and the land and all of the animals and birds, and just my privilege to be able to be here right now. So thank you for joining us from wherever you are. I'm really happy to introduce the panelists to you and then to moderate. I'm really hoping to save enough time at the end for questions and for comments, because as Tracy said in the introduction, I like to build coalitions, and I'd like to think we're building a coalition right now. And she addresses issues of conflict, harassment, and discrimination in workplaces. Natasha Arcentales and Alpa are here together on the screen. Alpa is a 9-year-old child and student that identifies as non-binary. They love and celebrate who they are and loves to hang out with their friends. They enjoy sharing their views with others through their podcast, Kids Like Me. So write that down and go look up the podcast, I think. As well as they like to sing pop music and dance. Natasha identifies as Quechua, Indigenous, and Spanish colonizer ancestry. She is the daughter of immigrant parents, a parent, an advocate, and a student. She is accountable for her actions to relearn issues of social justice and equity, to respect and live harmoniously with those close to her and those with whom she interacts. Her passion lies in advocating for and supporting issues affecting non-binary, transgender kids, specific to those under the age of 12. She voices barriers her child faces through her child's lived experiences and with their consent. Currently, she runs an online Facebook community called Libre, Libre, for parents, caregivers from Latin and Caribbean diaspora who care for children under the gender spectrum: trans, non-binary, non-conforming, gender fluid, and gender exploring. And we also have Jordan Applebaum, last but not least, from EGAL. Jordan is a proud queer trans vice principal with the Toronto District School Board and was the keynote speaker for the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity at the Ontario Educators Conference at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, also known as OISE, University of Toronto. He delivers workshops with presenters on the road through Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario on how to support transgender, non-binary, gender variant, two-spirit, LGBTQIA, and racialized students, staff, and community members. He is a visionary leader who believes in being proactive to create positive change within our diverse communities with inclusive teaching techniques, recognizing the importance of intersectionality and student voice. Jordan is proud to be working with EGAL to help support schools and businesses create braver spaces to support transgender and queer community members. So I feel, again, very privileged to be here with this group of panelists. And let's not waste any time, and we'll get right into the questions. And I think we'll start in the order that I introduced, and then we'll kind of move it around as well. So think about this question. I'd like you to talk about your experiences as a person identifying on the gender spectrum, or a parent or supporter of a person identifying on the gender spectrum while navigating public school, college, or university. I know, big question, but Julie, if you'd like to start off, that would be great.
Sure. So I identify as a trans woman. I'm just about to turn 33, just to like get some context of like, what, generation and what time I would have been in school. I grew up in Toronto, actually, in the West End. And, even though it was all, it was maybe like, 25 years ago since I was in elementary school or public school, or even high school, I would have to say that there has like been a world of a change since I was in, middle school or in public school. I grew up in the West End of Toronto. It wasn't like a particularly, conservative area to begin with. But I remember in grade 8, being under the impression that like being gay or gender deviant would somehow get me, kicked out of school. I had all these misconceptions as to my self-worth and, you know, questions of like self-esteem. And I really didn't feel like, you know, these kind of supports even existed. You know, I think I just kind of had a sense of being kind of, yeah, maybe like deviant or not a great person. So, you know, even going into university in Montreal, I still found that it was still a little bit hard at first to start coming out. Yeah, you know, I found that just even for the reason that like Toronto, a lot of, you know, peers also moved to Montreal at around the same time. So I, you know, still struggled with, you know, transitioning in a kind of safe space. And it really wasn't until I kind of came back to Toronto a few years, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, that I really started to like build and find trans community that I could really like connect with and felt like I was a part of. So yeah, like even though it wasn't that long ago, like, you know, I noticed during Pride Month now, even in small towns, there's pride flags are just like lining the streets, right? And I would have had a really hard time seeing that, like, you know, yeah, 15, 20 years ago. So I just feel like, yeah, the whole discourse has really changed. And I'm, you know, grateful for being able to be a part of it. And I kind of definitely wish that there was a bit more of this, you know, when I was in school. So yeah, maybe I'll leave it there for now, but yeah, happy to talk more about it later.
Great. That's a good start, Julie. We're hoping for more positive times. Ways to go. Suzanne, you want to go next?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to speak on behalf of my son, who I included in my book and who was really the reason that I ended up writing this book. So he's 33 now. So, you know, Julie's age. And he began his transition maybe 12 years ago. In university, actually, and I'll just tell you a couple of stories just to kind of put a point to Julie's beginning discussion about how much things have changed. So this was 2010, 2012, and I learned about his experience only afterwards, you know, 10 years afterwards, when I actually interviewed him for the book. And he told me that he was really struggling with his gender identity. I didn't know. This was before Caitlyn Jenner, this Orange is the New Black, any of the public discourse. So there was no outward discussion. He talked about how he met his first trans person when he was in university. And he didn't, and he says this, I didn't even know it was a thing that you could actually change your gender. And he said, if I knew then, if I knew at 5 years old that I could actually question and change my gender, I would have been so much happier and I wouldn't have struggled so much. And so he did struggle through those early years. And he talked about also, and I'll just say one more story because there's lots of other stories to hear. The biggest challenge he had when he began to move into transition was the use of bathrooms. That, he said, was actually the biggest issue that he had. He didn't feel comfortable any longer going into a female bathroom. He didn't really feel comfortable going into a male bathroom because he was still expressing as female. And so unless he could find a bathroom that was gender neutral, he couldn't go to a bathroom. And so he actually became very, I won't say he became agoraphobic, but he went outside. He went to places very intentionally, only knowing that there was a public bathroom that could actually accommodate a gender neutral visit. So I'll leave it there. That's his those are two of his stories.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. And as a parent, I know it's probably, when you hear afterwards what your child was going through, it must be so hard to think, I wish I had known. I wish we could have talked about it then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll go to Alpa and Natasha, and I guess you can decide who's going to go first. But I saw Natasha nodding along as you were speaking there too, Suzanne. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, I'll begin. Hello, everyone. I do have something written because I was afraid I would just kind of go off. So I do have something that I'm going to read off by. But yeah, so my Alpha's journey started at an early age in SKJK. And, as I was learning also or walking along Alpha's journey, I went to those who I thought would know my child best because they spent a long period of time. So I went to the teachers, I guess to ask for some advice, to ask about their observation about Alpa, so I could also understand Alpa's development. And in doing so, the primary grade, when I did confront the primary teachers, initially both teachers did say to me that all children explore. And to be quite honest, when I heard that response, it left me alone. It left me isolated because I knew it was beyond just a stage. I knew that this was something more. And at a young age, Alpa was also asking many questions about themselves. But however, I also believe with time, as I engaged both these elementary teachers, that they became more aware of, gender identity, gender spectrum issues. And I found that they actually started becoming more aware about speaking about gender identity in the classrooms. And it became kind of like an ongoing conversation in the classroom. So I do find that as I engaged, I think something just also opened with both of these teachers. But also, each grade that my child would go into, they would have a new teacher. And so I would also make the effort in speaking to these teachers to speak about, so they're aware of my child's pronouns and identity, but also I engaged with them because I wanted to hear, what was their supports for students that are under the gender spectrum. So overall, I would say coming grade 2 and onwards, everyone has been very supportive. The school itself has been very supportive. The school has made accommodations for gender neutral washrooms for both students and adults. There are 2S LGBTQ plus visible posters and materials throughout the school. And as Alpa sees themselves in this environment, I feel that they're growing with more confidence and that they're growing their willingness to share also with their peers. And so to me, that gives me a sense of pride, right? To see that Alpa is now taking on their own role of advocacy, that they're taking that role on their own terms and their own time and capacity of what they want to share and up to what extent. And so I feel that that's also done because if the school is providing that supportive system, then it allows for children who are under this gender spectrum to innately come out, to develop and voice and see that they're not alone, that they have their peers and allies with them as well.
Thanks, Natasha and Alpa. That's a story, that's a current story because it's happening right now. And I'm hoping that Jordan will also have some current, you can speak about your own experiences in school, but you're right in there now as a vice principal. So I look forward to hearing what you add to this.
Sure. Thank you everyone for having me. And it's really great to hear everyone's experiences and that you're willing to be vulnerable and share. So for me, when I was younger, I wasn't out when I was young. My parents didn't really know that word trans or how to support me. And I probably lived in a similar similar age as Julie was talking about, where there just wasn't a lot of representation. There wasn't positive representation of trans folks in the media. And so I didn't really have role models or anyone to look up to. And so I was very afraid to be myself and be out. And there were definitely signs that I showed my parents from the age of 3, but they didn't know about transitioning. They didn't know any of the language or what to do, really. And so I was more called a tomboy at the time. And there was a lack of understanding on my own behalf as well of what that meant to be trans. And as I got older, and seeing more positive representation in media a little bit and more now, but I was still afraid to be myself and nervous too of what does that mean as a trans guy? If I'm to come out as a trans guy and be myself, does that mean, can I still be a feminist? And like, obviously, yes, men, boys, trans guys can be feminists, but not knowing that at the time, and really, really understanding of coming into myself and realizing who I could be, and whether I'd lose my friends, my family, my job, and really like everything in my life. It was a lot of depression at that time, a lot of sadness and fear. And but then once coming into myself and realizing who I was, it was a release of all of that fear, and coming out of that depression of feeling like, oh, actually it's okay to be myself, and there is a lot of acceptance, and things are changing. And starting on testosterone also gave me a lot of confidence, and just made me feel more balanced, healthier, happier. I felt like I could be seen more in society. So, and now like being a teacher for 11 years and supporting students in schools has really been amazing. And now being an administrator and making sure that, we'll get to this later, but making sure that all the necessary things are there to support trans youth and all gender variant children and non-binary students. It's really, really important. So I'll leave it there for now, but yeah.
Thanks so much, Jordan. So just so everybody knows, we did give the questions to the panelists beforehand, because like Jordan says, this is a vulnerable situation, and you're sitting and you're talking and you're sharing, and we wanted people to be able to think about the questions beforehand. So I'm going to go to the second question, but I'd like to start with Alpha and Natasha if possible, because this question is as a parent or a person identifying on the gender spectrum, what do you want teachers and education workers and other parents to know? How can they best provide support? So Alpha or Natasha, what could you say to a teacher? The best things to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Alpha's going to go first. I think they wanted to address also the first question, and then I'll address the second question. Thank you. No, just.
Oh, so I talk about
no, just, yeah.
Oh. At my school, I feel like I'm supported. At the beginning of the year, my teacher said that I was misgendered me. After my mom and I spoke to my homeroom teacher, that I identified as non-binary, as non-binary, they started using my pronouns. But sometimes they would use the wrong pronoun accidentally, but I wasn't mad. I just corrected them. Teachers in the beginning of the year should ask what students should ask the students what pronouns they'd like to go, because that student may not say anything and just go along with the wrong pronoun, and that can really hurt them. Now, can you go on the tablet?
Okay. Okay, so I'll answer the second question. Okay, so what I would like to see from educators and community members to realize that kids under the gender spectrum, what also exists are racialized and marginalized students from these communities. There are multi layers of identity, and the experiences are unique and should not be categorized under one label, under LGBTQ. But to look at the intersectionalities which require critical analysis to engage appropriately. It is also important to look at the broader scope of the student and how they identify, which can be impacted by culture and socioeconomic factors as well. What is also important to know is that children are coming into themselves at a younger age, and to be open for educators, administrators, community members to be open that students' paths to see and that individual and not pathologize them based on their age or grade, but to take time to see that child. And especially if the parent is coming to you, educator, administrator, for some support. The best way to support these issues that I mentioned, which is intersectionality specific to racialized students and students in the primary years, is for educators and community members to take time to listen, to really see the individual and to learn. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natasha, and thanks to Alka too. Those are important things to know, and I know we have a lot of people who work in education here, and I hope they're taking some notes on this too. Jordan, I'd like to hear from you next.
Sure, thanks very much, Karen. So we all know how important it is for kids to be seen and heard in order to learn and focus on their studies. And it's really important that everyone on the gender spectrum feels comfortable to be their true selves, because lack of acceptance can lead to homelessness, self-harm, all kinds of not like terrible feelings and lack of confidence. Whereas acceptance leads to confident people who are proud to be themselves, and they're more engaged. And you'll just see how much a school will transform when everyone can be themselves, and intersectionality, the importance of that as well, as she was saying, as Natasha was mentioning. It's really important to ask people how best you can support them, because I can speak for myself as a trans guy and what I need and what I want and who I want to be out to and how comfortable I feel. But every person is different, and every trans guy is different, every trans person is different, every non-binary person is different. So it's really important to ask how best you can support them and how they want to be out, who they want to be out to, as everyone's needs will vary. And respect pronouns. If you introduce yourself with your pronouns, it's really helpful. Add your pronouns on your email signature, on Zoom calls. If you notice, we have our pronouns here, both in French and English. You can do that on Zoom calls to create a more inclusive environment. You can put up trans, non-binary, and gender variant role models on the walls of your classrooms, in the hallways, and that way everyone will have a lot of role models. Make sure they're not just white, cis, able-bodied, heteronormative posters. Make sure it's really inclusive, so that everyone can see themselves. And also educate yourself. Podcasts. There's a great podcast by one of our presenters today, and so go check that one out. And there's also books that you can check out. Suzanne wrote a book, and there's other books that we'll mention later. Documentaries, there's tons of resources out there. You can start a GSA, like a Gay Straight Alliance at your school if you don't already have one, or called an Equal Rights Gender and Sexuality Alliance. You should also have a BSA, like a Black Student Alliance, a Muslim leadership group, and then get these groups to work together. You can have an Indigenous leadership group, Asian, trans, queer role models within these, and talk about it, put it on the announcements. There's so many incredible things that you can do at your school. So those are just to name a few.
So Jordan, before you mute yourself, I want to ask a quick follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
As a leader in a school, when you have a teacher who comes to you and says, "Oh no, I misgendered a student. What do I do?" What do you tell them?
Yeah, just try not to make a big deal out of it. If you make a big deal out of it, it makes it harder and more awkward for the other person. I really appreciate it when people apologize, even if it's after the fact. Like if somebody misgenders me on a call or in an interview or somewhere, and then they later say, "Hey, I messed up, sorry about that." And then they just correct it and say, "I see you as a guy, and yes, I know your pronouns are he, him." They don't make a big deal. They're just like, apologize, move on. That's the best thing you can do. Just like racism, if you mess up, make sure that you're apologizing, naming it, and do better in the future. So.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice for people. Make a mistake, own up to it as soon as possible and make it right and learn from it and move on. But also to create the culture where people will come to you and say, what should I do, is also really important. And we can all help to create that culture. Julie, I'd like you to go next, please.
Sure. I'm not sure that I can necessarily add much more to that pretty thorough list, but I suppose what I would just maybe emphasize is this notion that, yeah, like, once again, drawing most from my own experience, you know, when people, regardless of age, are like struggling with transitioning, with like expressing their true self, that does often, you know, come across in oblique ways, right? It won't always necessarily appear as, you know, somebody who, you know, doesn't look like they fit into one gender or another, right? Like I seem to recall just like struggling with a lot of other things that weren't on the surface directly, you know, related to my gender identity. And I see this like in the work I do today. So at the 519 Community Center, we're located at like Church and Wellesley. We're in the downtown east, especially during the pandemic, where a lot of the inequalities in our society have been like heightened, where like homeless populations have been like really decimated. You know, a lot of people who, you know, find sanctuary in our neighborhood, you know, are struggling with gender identity or gender expression and their sexual orientation, but people are also struggling with a whole lot of other issues also, right? That may or may not be directly related to that, right? So like homelessness, substance use, mental health crises, right? A lot of these on the surface may not appear to be, you know, directly related to transitioning, but are really kind of like at the core and, you know, a fundamental part of who this person is and what success looks like. So, you know, I recall, you know, like in secondary school, you know, like struggling with this internally quite a bit, but that didn't always kind of come across that way to a lot of people, right? I was, you know, struggling with a lot of shame. So like, I feel like I, in many ways, overcompensated in the other way. And yeah, consequently, like I did not do very well in secondary school, like academically, simply because, you know, that's not really what my priority was at that time. But at the same time, I really wasn't in a space where I could feel like supported. So I was really, you know, in retrospect, I was really kind of caught, I felt, between, you know, different paths. So yeah, I think that's one thing I really want to get across is that, like, you know, success looks, you know, different to different people. And, you know, and in a secondary school context, you know, just kind of like surviving it is success for a lot of people. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Julie. You're right. There's a lot that's been said already, but maybe Suzanne's got a little bit more to add as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually have a few things that I want to pass on. So I want to just mention that Natasha had said something really valuable when she spoke about not pathologizing. And so one of the points that I'd like to make is to help schools normalize, whether it's intersectionality or gender variance or gender question, help them normalize it. And that means more than just creating a safe space. It means a whole lot of other, I know that could be a discussion, and likely Jordan has a lot to say about that, but the whole idea of creating a normalized environment for diversity. And also to echo, another point is to echo what Jordan said, which is to ask about how Jordan's question was, how can I support you? And my question, coming from a mediator's background, is what do you need from us to feel supported? What do you need from us to feel supported? And so that's also a question to ask frequently. And another 2 points that I'd like to make also is to give kids conflict resolution strategies and skills so that when they feel that they're being misgendered or they feel that they're being intentionally disrespected or misgendered, how can they handle it? You know, they can go home and they can talk to their parents, or they can just internalize it, or they can talk to their teacher. Yes. I do think that there's really a role and an opportunity for schools to develop strategies for kids to really develop these skills themselves. And on the final point, I would also say, also coming from my own profession, to really develop training programs for not only for parents, but for school administrators and teachers, so that they can be more tuned in when kids may be struggling in nonverbal ways. And they also can be trained into understanding what trans and gender diversity is really all about, from not only from an emotional level, from an expression level as well, all the different layers, so that they really understand it and can navigate these conversations from a place of knowledge and confidence.
So important, Suzanne, to talk about skills like that. As a teacher, content is really important. I get that, but it's the skills that will carry us through, because when I went to school in the 70s and 80s, that content now, some of it's still current, some of it was wrong, as I'm finding out now, and some of it is just totally obsolete. So I think it's really important that we focus on the skills. And what I'm doing in some of my own learning, I'm learning that characteristics can be learned, that you don't just say, I'm this type of person, or, I don't listen. No, you can learn. You can learn to be empathetic. You can learn to sympathize. You can learn to be a better listener. And those are all skills that we should be looking at growing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the question number 3 is long. And so if people want to answer part of it or all of it, we are totally open to that. I see some really good questions coming in from the audience as well. So the question number 3 talks about immediate or extended family or chosen family support. What does that look like? How do you know that you're being supported? What kind of conversations did you have within your family to support your child? Or did you have with parents to say, this is the type of support that I need? And then do you have advice or resources? I see a book on Suzanne's shelf that might be a resource as well. Advice or resources for all parents to educate and support their children who may have questions about friends or classmates who may identify differently on the gender spectrum. So a very big question. And I'm going to go to Jordan first this time. I should have warned you of that beforehand. I'm sorry, Jordan.
Oh, it's fine. I don't mind being put on the spot, so that's all good. So in terms of support from family, one of the best things that my dad said to me when I came out to him was that he said he didn't understand because that's not his lived experience, but that he'd always support me. And that was probably the best thing he could have said to me, because I don't need him to understand from an experience and experiential part, but the only thing you ever want from a parent or from somebody who's family or from a friend is their support. And so if you can support people and just tell them that you support them no matter what, and that you accept them no matter what of who they are, then that's the best thing you can do. That's the best friend and best family member you can be. In terms of chosen family, I definitely needed chosen family when I was younger, because some family members, I experienced transphobia and homophobia within my family. So chosen family was really, really important for me. In terms of resources, I do have a resource that I was creating with ETFO last year, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. And it's a resource, it's a site that we built, which has resources for students, for families and parents, and for teachers as well. So I can either pass that on to you, Tracy, and you can put it in the chat, or I can put it in the chat, or Karen, I don't know how that works, but
just pass it on to me and I'll grab it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And then there's also a book that I know my mom really, she struggled a bit when I came out as trans, and this book really helped her. So it's called Transitions of the Heart, and I'll pass along that resource as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jordan, for sharing the resources and the information too. It's really helpful. I I'd like to go to Julie next. Sorry for my little stutter there.
Sure. So I'm not entirely sure where to start with this one. I know, so I don't have kids myself. I know for my parents, when I mean, first of all, like I felt like moving out of my like hometown, my neighborhood, that was a very important initial step for me originally. Like going to school in Montreal. Like I did kind of feel like in order to start transitioning, like I did need that space, and it still took a while. I would say that for when it came to, just conversations with my parents, I think that as like from a young age, I could, I was expressing, feminine behavior, and I recall there being like a certain like hostility from my parents, like the sense that like I'm, they didn't want to speak about it and they didn't want to address it and they kind of wanted it to go away. So, for a long time we were just kind of at this impasse, and anytime it kind of came up, there was this like, we both, wanted to recoil, right? And it really took until like having my own sense of independence and space that I was able to like work up the courage within myself to come out. That being said, chosen family, role models, community, like these things all take on like a really huge role when, in these contexts, when we're transitioning. A lot of it takes place kind of like in solitude, as well as like in like virtual communities. Like I think this is a really big space for people to explore their identity and to connect with people. Especially if you're in a smaller community, there might not be that many other people who you can relate to in this way. So I would say, yeah, virtual communities and chosen communities definitely play quite a large role. There was another part. In terms of some resources, I know that my parents, or at least my mom, did some workshops with CTYS, Central Toronto Youth Services. I'm not sure if they still do have these services. I would think so. But they had some workshops specifically targeted to, so they still do, to parents. And I didn't attend these, but I heard that they were very helpful. That being said, like, as an adult and as somebody who, went through some pretty rough patches with transitioning, I would, oh, cool. So we actually have someone who is attending the workshops. I did eventually reconcile with my family. Like it did take like years of, not great terms and not a lot of speaking. I have a sibling as well. And I think it was hard for them too, to, see me in a different way. But from my experience, it was never, like abusive, but, it was very painful for a long time. And, but at the same time, they did come around, and I do have like a really newfound and deep appreciation for my, my non-chosen family, my birth family. About I can tell, like, with my father, for instance, like he had a pretty hard time accepting me. But it did, like, I know it's not the case for everybody, but in my case, like it did get better. And I do really, appreciate the support that I did get from my family. I remember there being a really interesting conversation with a great aunt of mine who had Alzheimer's and was living in a long-term care home. And I remember when I think it was a conversation my mom was having with her. And she mentioned that I was transitioning. And my aunt said something really interesting. She was like, "Oh, well, she like breathed a sigh of relief and was like, I'm glad he's not gay." And, like, I'm not saying that that's necessarily like an acceptable, but she was like late, early 90s. And it's not exactly the response I would have assumed, right? In terms of like, that my aunt really wanted me to transition, kind of like, she saw it in me my whole life. And, she could see that I wasn't, a boy or a man. And, she, instinctively just like felt really like happy for me, despite not really knowing about these things like whatsoever. So it's really interesting how people kind of perceive these transitioning. It's not always what you think, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I think, just as support looks different for everyone, reactions look different for everyone too, and maybe really totally unexpected. And there is no one right answer anywhere anyways, but I think maybe if we've given some people some kind of nugget that they can go ahead with, then yeah, go ahead and support. Suzanne?
Yeah, I'll just be brief and say that my experience when my son Skylar announced or came to us and spoke to us about his transitioning, I was very welcoming. I didn't understand it, much like Jordan's father. I didn't understand it, but whatever, there is unconditional love, and we continue that. So I'll just say my experience was really interesting. So this was in 10, 12 years ago, and there was this fluid and non-dramatic invitation for him to do what he needed to do. And as he began to transition, we began to speak more to our family and extended family and friends. And after a few months, I started getting responses. People said to me, "Wow, you're very cool about this. I don't know if I would be so cool about it." And I was getting responses like that from friends and family, educated people, liberal-minded people who I thought were just kind of open to the possibility of life. And I was getting that kind of curious, kind of negating pushback. And it was then that I got very curious about how my attitude of easy acceptance without question was actually not the norm in my experience, in my realm. And that's when I began to actually do research, and I sent out a big survey actually to people, asking them questions about their interests. And I found that so many people who I thought would behave otherwise were not so positive or optimistic. And that's when I decided to write this book, to say, okay, I'm just going to give people some basic information here.
Yeah, that's when you need to do something, just do it. And if it ends up in a book, even better. Great. Natasha and Alpa, if Alpa's around for this one. I think Alpa's going to come back for another question at least.
Yeah. Yes, I'll answer this question. So our immediate family is aware of Alpa's journey. Alpa is aware that they have support and love from them. But it is also a working process because there are many generations going from, being a young adult to being a grandparent. So there's different levels of uncertainties and maybe misconceptions that come up. But the discussions are open because the conversations that I've had, I've made it so that not to feel shy or embarrassed about the questions that they have in their mind, that it's normal. And so I think because of that, it's been really easy for my family to have these doors open for ALPA, and I do believe that ALPA is blessed in that sense. And I also, ALPA's young, right? ALPA's 9 years old, and I completely understand that this journey is going to evolve, and it might evolve many times throughout their life. And that's also a conversation I'm having with my family to be aware and maybe even prepare for the unexpected, but to, that regardless the journey that ALPA decides to transition to evolve to, that bottom line is that ALPA feels safe and that there's love and support. And I think really that's, in regards to family support, that's where ALPA is right now. And and I think when I do when you share with other people, I understand some people are shocked, actually. They cannot believe that myself and the family members are so open and supportive. And, it's interesting because I'm thinking, well, it's love. We want our children to just have love like any other child. So, so that still happens where you think people who are very liberal minded or progressive, they still come with some kind of interesting reactions to that. In regards to recommendations, I have to admit, I've been kind of thinking about my journey with my immediate friends and family members. And I actually just talked. And I think that's really the only thing I could recommend is talk. As an adult, as an educator, let that child who is questioning, has questions about their peers, let them talk. Let them unpack what perceptions they have and not be judged, because and I'm, I guess, referring to mainly primary, elementary kids at this point, because they're also developing their language and their awareness of what is happening with their peers, So there are going to be times that some language may come up that may seem inappropriate, and instead of having a reaction to quickly react to that, I just let them talk, and together with the child and educator or parent or caregiver to actually explore together ways and how to learn about their peers' journey, and maybe even engage with other communities, the LGBTQ communities, and speak to somebody. And I really think talking and engaging with community is the best way for anyone to learn, because that's really the process I went through. I don't have a book, and I know when friends would ask questions, I didn't recommend a book. I just spoke to them. And I think speaking, talking, and sharing really is a really big part of learning, and not being afraid, of hearing maybe misconceptions or what have you. I think that's normal. And I think talking about it and letting the other person know that they're safe to come with these maybe ideas that, that they may have been influenced by whatever it is, that's normal. And let's just have these conversations. So, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Natasha. That's, my takeaway from what you've just said is love and support and talking, because a book has an end, but you should keep talking about it. Read the book and share the information, but talk and ask questions and answer questions and revisit. It's face-to-face is best, and it's probably the best way to communicate as well. So Natasha, if Alpha's back around, I'm going to go to the fourth question, and I call this one, I'm going to date myself here. I grew up in Barrie, and we used to watch Tiny Talent Time on CHTV, and the host would sometimes interview the kids, and he would say, if you had 3 wishes, what would you wish for? So for a perfect education system, what would your 3 or 2 or 4, or however many wishes, how would you make it the perfect system? Alpha, do you want to start?
Wait, this?
Yes.
I think, again, that it's important that teachers get students' consent about the pronouns they would like to go by. Schools should update registration or any other school forms with a category, so they can fill in with their pronoun they want to go by. And another box saying if it's okay to publicly say their pronouns, because maybe some students would like to just use their name. Lastly, it would be nice to see more activities for Pride Month, like having people from the 2S LGBTQ plus community come to visit their schools and tell their stories and do activities together. Bye.
Thanks, Alpha. Natasha, do you want to add anything? Any wishes?
Yeah. I think it's just something that I mentioned earlier, right? I think having visibility of racialized 2S LGBTQ plus teachers, administrators, educators, I think that's very important to have them present in the system. And also, I know, again, like Alka mentioned during Pride Month, that the discussion be not just during June, right, but being something that's normalized and throughout the school year. I also believe that when we're speaking about 2S LGBTQ plus communities, that to look at also the history and look at the resilience. It's important to also see like how our community members have contributed to the bigger spectrum of the society, and it's important for that to see that. So yeah, I think representation is key, definitely. And yeah, it's essential for students to hear these lived experience, right? To see that they are not alone in the school system, that there is support there, and that I think it's just so I'm just going through my notes here. I'm just going to repeat. I think representation is something that sticks out to me, and I would like to see more of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. If you think of something after you find something else in your notes, Natasha, feel free to add to. Suzanne?
I don't have a lot to add because my kids are way past the school system, but on a philosophical level, I would just reiterate the couple of things that I had found important throughout this discussion, which is to find a way to create a safe culture. I mean, safe cultures are everything. And so safe cultures in school, that it comes from the top down, the bottom up, side to side. And how do you do that? Those are all the small and large things of ensuring that behavior is respectful and that it's modeled and that it's supported and that people are normalized and that people have the skills to protect themselves or to feel that they can address situations that come up that are uncomfortable, or have an open door policy. So all of these things are aspects that you would find in workplaces that also need to be included in schools as well, that really speak to a culture that is at its systemic, supportive.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. We, a number of years ago in OSSTF, we had door hangers that said this was a safe space, but we've since changed to stickers that you can put on your laptop or on your iPad, because a place in of itself can't necessarily be safe, but it's the person and the caring person there who makes it open and welcoming. And I think that's really important for people to be identifying and saying, you can talk to me. I will do my best to respond and be helpful. Next, we've got Jordan.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure I was unmuted there. So yeah, definitely centering education on Black, Two-Spirit, Asian, racialized, queer, trans folks, making sure that it's not just able-bodied white people, making sure that kids feel comfortable to be themselves and are proud of disabilities and see them as a benefit and all the strengths that they have. And looking at history, her story, their story, creating leadership groups, as I was mentioning earlier, like ERGs, GSAs, BSAs, Black Student Alliances, and then getting these groups to work together on things like consent. And I really liked how Alpa was talking about consent in terms of pronouns. So leadership groups can attend workshops and then start leading the school and lead workshops on consent and on mental health and well-being and all kinds of incredible things, and start writing the announcements. Making sure that student voice is part of that, acknowledging systemic racism and intersectionality and the importance of intersectionality and celebrating diversity, and then the impacts of colonization on Black, Indigenous, Asian, racialized, queer, and trans folks. Make sure that you're talking, sorry, my internet's unstable, but I think it's okay. I just got a message. You can still hear me, Karen?
I can,
okay.
yep, I can.
Okay, perfect. Talking about trans issues and rights all year long, so not only during Trans Day of Remembrance or during Pride Month. And I also noticed in the chat, somebody was, I think Tracy acknowledged it, that you can talk to your superintendent if you want your Pride flag or a Progress flag flown all year. You can also talk to the administrators, and I would go there first, because if your administrators are supportive, they should have the flag up all year. I think that's a great idea to have it, and also have a Two-Spirit flag up. If it's not at the front, then somewhere in the office or in the hallways. There's other flags that you can raise as well, the intersex flag. And I also noticed in the chat too, somebody was talking about addressing with grade 9 students when they're saying, oh, there's only 2 genders. Well, obviously there's more than 2 genders. Trans folks like me exist, but you can also bring up the fact that intersex people exist and they're born with both male and female parts. And that's a great way to enter that whole spectrum of gender, how there's not just 2 binaries, and say to them, you know, it's okay if that's what you've been taught. Like, you think there's only two genders for a reason. Like, we live in a very binary world, and just let them know that's okay if that's what you think, but there's actually a huge spectrum, and there's people who are non-binary, there's people who are gender variant, there's people who might feel feminine one day and then not masculine or feminine another day, and they want to go by they pronouns. I know kids who, when they feel comfortable and they feel safe, then they'll come out at a very young age and they'll say, yeah, I go by they pronouns, or I go by they and I go by him. And it might change day to day, or it might be depending on how they feel, or they might say, yeah, you can call me either he or they. So it really depends on the kids, but I think just creating that inclusive environment for everyone is really important. Make sure you have all gender washrooms at your school. Really important for everybody, and don't wait for trans folks to ask for all gender washrooms. We wouldn't wait for students to ask for an IEP if they have a disability or specific needs. So why would we wait for trans folks to ask for an all gender washroom? They might not feel comfortable, and whereas if they walk in the building, they see the all gender washroom there, they're going to feel comfortable to be out and feel more comfortable that this is a safe place for them. You can also realize that all schools have trans, non-binary, gender variant, and intersex students, and it's that they're not feeling safe, and that's why they're not out. They're not comfortable to be themselves. But when you create that inclusive environment, they're going to be more comfortable to be themselves.
Jordan, I can't thank you enough for the very specific, detailed list. It's really, really helpful, and I see a little bit of chatter going on in the chat about access afterwards to this video, and I believe it will be posted on our OSSTF YouTube. We did another webinar earlier this year, and there'll be another one in August. But I'm thinking, if I was sitting here right now and I was a teacher or an education worker, I'd be getting the link as soon as it's up, and I'd be sending it to the administration team at my school and saying, can you please watch this and let's talk about it afterwards. Not just watch this, but let's talk about it afterwards and see where we're going to go with all of these suggestions from all of these panelists. And Julie, what have you got to add?
Yeah, well, I once again fully endorse the suggestions that have come before me. Like, I think those are all excellent initiatives, like in terms of like resources and the kind of like culture change. I guess maybe just like going back to my previous point and maybe ending on a unsatisfying philosophical note, I would just kind of say that, I don't think there's like one wish that could be asked that would necessarily solve everything. I don't think that there's like one perfect system that will necessarily solve everything. And I think that is kind of part of what I think we should be moving towards is, recognizing that systems, that's kind of what got us into this mess in the first place, is believing that there's this like one universal system that works for everybody and that everybody can fit into. And what we're just learning time and again is that like people don't fit into kind of, black and white, male or female kind of categories. And that really, once you take this kind of notion to its furthest, we just realize that we're all existing along a spectrum, right? And in kind of every regard. And, we're all exceptions to the rule at some point, right? And that's why, like, I kind of want to go back to, like, when I think about secondary school and, a lot of the pressures that are put onto youth at this time with regards to, what it means to be successful. And, like, I don't think, surviving kind of gets enough credit, right? And just, like, creating systems that will validate people where they're at, even if it doesn't fall in a nice, like, neat metric, the way our education system is even set up pedagogically, like it breeds a certain type of like inequality, right? There's always people at the top of the class and at the bottom, and and obviously that's not all on the table to be changed, but I think when we start talking about like identities and belonging, we really have to step outside of thinking of like one system that can, solve everything, right? I think we really have to focus on the exceptions, right? And start to incorporate that into the rule. And I think that is how we got to this point, through all these conversations that, parents and students and youth have with each other, about like, how do we survive this system that's not designed for us, right? And that is really what will, that's at the heart of, I think, a lot of, queer and anti-oppressive movements, is that kind of like solidarity. So, I guess, that's what I would kind of just end on, is that like, we really have to not believe that there is kind of one system or one magic bullet that will solve everything.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And thanks for calling me out on it, because I said it. And then as I was listening to your answers, I thought, but these aren't wishes. We need things that are real and concrete, going to make a difference here. It really is a journey without a finish line, because it's continuous. And I don't know if Brene Brown coined it, but open hearts, open minds, I think, is the best way to approach anything. I've heard her say it a lot, so I'll give her credit for it. But I think that's the best thing that you can do, as it's only the second week in July, and I'm thinking about September. And as people in education head back, if they could go in with open hearts and open minds, I think that would make a really big difference. So the end of the formal questions, but now we really get to where we can get advice from the panelists and where you can answer. And, we may have a question where everybody answers, or we may have one where we only have a couple of people, and that's fine. There are so many here that I really appreciate that Tracy's going to navigate through the questions, and then I can still try and moderate, where we're going to go with them. But there's really, really good work here that we need to be looking at and talking about. So I'll pass it to Tracy.
Okay, so the first question I think we should address, I'm not going to address them in order, but I think it's important. This is from Nadia. My 8-year-old boy identified himself as a girl. He asks me so many questions for a long time. Why do I have a penis? I'm a girl. Since they were 5 years old, they've asked these things. They want to wear girls' clothes, and they're going back to school in September as a girl. The school is aware, and the teachers are amazing, but Nadia is extremely scared, and she's worried that she started too young. She only wants the best for her, and she knows deeply that it's not a phase. She feels very, very alone as a parent. She also mentions that when she uses the proper pronoun, her daughter, I'm going to say it, her daughter feels so grateful. So she wants to know how, I guess she just wants some reassurance, and she wants to know how to manage this with 2 older brothers. So I don't know who you want to start, Karen, but why don't you go ahead and see if anybody wants to start this.
So I'll look for volunteers. I can see everybody on the screen. I see Suzanne first, and then we'll see if others have something to add to. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Although my child was quite a bit older than this beautiful young person, I can say that what was really essential in our family was that we had an undeniable support. That was a nucleus of support, so that that our child felt that in the family, there was safety, there was acceptance, and there was an undeniable sense of love. And then when he felt that, then that was extended beyond and beyond and beyond. And so what I would say to this mother is to ensure that that there is a nucleus of support, to find other parents to support her, and also to support the child, and just, you know, bit by bit find allies. That's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks.
There's lots more, but that's the beginning.
Yes, I know. So does anyone else want to add something as well? Their questions are just pouring in now too, and I think that's probably going to be. Jordan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that as well, because I was about the same age. I was about 3 when I started acknowledging and saying, like, hey, when's mine going to grow? And noticing my brother when he was older, and noticing things were different. And I just figured that, you know, it's because I was younger. And I think it's amazing that you're seeing your daughter and you're saying the correct pronouns with her. And I think that's the most important, like, just being there and supporting her through this is really important. And the fact that it's set up at school as well, that's amazing. So it's really great that at such a young age, she's able to be herself and she can be supported. And I'm sure if you're nervous, you can talk to other people and make sure that you feel supported as well as a parent, and like check out all those resources that were shared, because there's so much out there and you're not alone. There's lots of people who are trans. There's lots of mothers of trans parents. And yeah, I think it's incredible that you're there to support your daughter. So thank you for coming, and thank you for asking questions.
Yeah, thanks for the response, Jordan. And thanks for mentioning the resources too. I think we can save the chat afterwards and can probably add it as a comment onto when it ends up on the OSST of YouTube, so that if you're listening to this somewhere down the road, you'll be able to go through and find all of the resources that we've added here. I don't see anyone else signaling. So Tracy, would you give us another question, please?
So perfect. So I just wanted to mention to Nadia that I put the PFLAG Canada in the chat. You can find your local chapter. It's a nonprofit of support for parents there. This is another great question. Ryan works as a special education teacher and works with a variety of students with learning differences. So how do you speak to a reluctant parent about their child's transition when parents have a pushback on understanding gender identity and other identities regarding the learning involved?
Okay, so a reluctant parent. Any thoughts from anyone?
I can jump in there first, and then people can formulate other thoughts.
Yep.
We actually had that circumstance happen at our school, and there was a parent who was nervous about even hearing about any trans issues when their child, either of their children, were in the room, and wanted to remove them from health curriculum. And so I just had a one-on-one conversation with them about the importance of allowing their children to hear about differences and hear about all the incredible people who are out there, and in order to celebrate diversity and create safer spaces for our school. And I think there's a lot of fear of judgment, and there's shame because of colonization and 153 years of colonization, the way our system is set up, that I think parents get very nervous that they're going to be blamed or shamed, or and I think once they realize that there's such a huge community of support out there, and that it's okay to be trans, then it's easier for them to accept their children and realize that, like, it's not my parents' fault that my brother is straight. It's not their fault that he's a cisgender guy. It's also, it has nothing to do with he is the way he is, and I am the way I am. I'm a trans guy. I'm very proud to be out. And there's lots of people who are proud and to be themselves, but it's more a societal issue, just like systemic racism. And so we need to change that. And I think through conversations, and also through the fact that it's a human right. We all have the right to self-identify, and knowing that when we don't accept children for who they are, we're going to lose them. They're going to be depressed. They end up homeless. They end up running away from parents. They end up not talking to you. They end up just shutting down. And that's not what you want. If you want a home that's very supportive and you want to be able to talk to your child, the best thing is to educate yourself. And so that's why all these resources are in there. PFLAG, as was mentioned, is an incredible resource, really helped my dad through some stuff. And it's really great to talk to other parents who are going through the same thing as you are with any kind of fear or questions you have. So yeah, great resource out there.
Okay, yeah. Suzanne, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I do. So coming at, when I hear that question, my mediator background jumps in, and what I feel is that when there is a parent who is fearful or negative, when they're negative in some way, it's because they're fearful. And often they're fearful because they don't have the information, or they have misinformation, or they haven't taken the time to just identify and channel all the other negativity that may be swirling around their family and their immediate surroundings. And so what I have found and what I have done in my own life is to address it at, as Jordan said, one conversation have a conversation. I would really work with that parent and find out, just get really curious, not judgmental, and invite them to start getting curious, not judgmental, and invite them into a conversation to find out what's really going on. I mean, is there a religious component, or is there just a generalized angst about it? And the more you really spend time with someone to find out what their own barriers are, the more you can incrementally break them down, in my view.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm not sure if Natasha or Julie want to add anything to that one, or we'll go to the next question. Okay, Tracy?
Okay, our 14-year-old child recently came out as trans in the last couple of weeks. I've read and listened to a lot of LGBTQA+ podcasts and materials to educate myself so that we can support him as much as possible. She was assigned male at birth, also lives with autism, and I'm very worried about the additional vulnerability that her new path may present. She wants to start transitioning right away, but we worry that she's not prepared for the discrimination she may face. Any thoughts or advice to us? That's certainly a challenge with both of those exceptions. And it's like, especially with autism, and then they want to come out too, and I can understand that. So we'll pass that along to Karen.
Yeah, and I will look for someone who's willing to take on the question, the big one.
Can I jump in there?
Sure, yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
Sure, and then anyone else who wants to add. I just think it's really important, I can understand that fear that's coming up and the nervousness and wanting to protect your child. So I think it's really great if you're able to reach out to the school and make sure it's a supportive environment, even just within their classroom. Make sure that the teacher has resources, and if they don't use some of the resources, share those resources with the teacher so that they can create a really safe, inclusive environment in the classroom, but also with the administrators as well. There's a lot they can do to create a safer environment within the school, in terms of announcements, putting role models up in the school, having discussions, and not having them once a year, like having discussions on a daily basis and having it throughout the curriculum. Like that's part of the reason for homophobia and transphobia, is it's not talked about enough. And I think the safer the environment is for your child, the better you'll feel. and the better your child will feel about coming out and being themselves, because it's their right. And so I understand that you'd feel nervous, especially with the additional special needs component. But just they go hand in hand, right? You want them to feel comfortable and proud of their autism and proud to be trans as well. And if that is how they identify, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if it was trans or non-binary, the term that was being used. But however they want to identify, that's they should feel comfortable to be able to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan, for the perspective. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to add. These questions are hard. Like I will acknowledge that. But
Yeah.
Again, as Julie said earlier, and I'll go to you right now, Julie, there is no one answer, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty hesitant about like offering advice, you know, when it's, especially because it's your own kid, you know the situation best, and a little bit outside of my pay grade. That being said, you know, if you're worried about your child's like being vulnerable, like, you know, you really make sure that you can be a safe space for them, on top of, you know, like Jordan was saying, like doing the advocacy pieces within the school, like that is very important. But, you know, make sure that you are at least like their safe space, right? And that you can at least validate this part of them, even if you can't guarantee that the rest of the world will, you know? I feel like that's something I missed out on a little bit, because because of my parents' own fear of being judged and being seen as bad parents, or, you know, I feel like I missed out on that kind of like communication with them, because we were all so scared and didn't know what to do, right? So I would have really appreciated at least like had my family been my safe space, and then that would have given me a lot of strength in kind of facing the world, right? So yeah, like on one hand, with all the advocacy in the world, you will never be able to make the outside world like a completely safe place. You know, we all experience this as just being people in the world, right? But you know, I would really, for all parents, right? Like if you can, you know, genuinely create a like Susan was saying too, like like wholesome conversations, right? And like yeah, if you can really open those lines of communication, I think it will go a long way to like building that confidence and feeling like they have a place in the world.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Thanks so much. I think I might be going back to you, Tracy.
Okay, perfect. It's funny, every time I try to answer a question, a little window pops up and says, your internet's unstable and I can't see the question. My child is starting high school and has recently identified as male. They are very active in sport. How will this affect my child who has played travel soccer, hockey, baseball, entering high school?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Jordan, you're in elementary school, correct? And the high school question, but I don't know maybe if you know from the high schools that your school feeds into, or if others have answers about that.
So it's somebody who's trans male. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on the school, but students who identify as trans male should have the right to compete with, like, be involved in either of the sports that they choose to. And if they identify as male, then they should be able to play basketball with the boys if they choose to, and try out for that team and play with that team. So I'm not sure if I'm missing the question though, if I'm missing part of it.
Yeah, if there was clarification, they can always put it in the box. Well, but it's a pretty specific question, and I think it might be worthy of a call to the school.
Definitely to the coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the coach or even the principal, just to ask on a general, because you may have a number of different coaches as well. But okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's more to that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on what the specific question is, but it would be a good thing to talk to both the administrator and the coach, and as long as they're out, and speak to what the concerns are, like if they want to be playing with the boys, or if they want to be playing if they want a team that's all gender, because that's something that can change at a school too if you advocate for it and just say, well, actually, I don't know if my child really wants to be with only playing with boys, and so is there a way that we can have an all gender team so that anyone can try out, anyone can be on it?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Jordan, and another example of how there isn't just one right answer. There's many different opportunities as well. Tracy.
Okay, here's an interesting question, and it might be difficult to answer. It's kind of difficult for me to read, but what qualifications do you have to diagnose gender dysphoria or give parental advice? You're teachers and administrators, right? What kind of special mental health training do you have? Why do you feel qualified to give this advice? And is the board liable for negative outcomes? This is from Nadine. And Nadine also said in the chat that it seems like we have answers and we expect parents to just agree with us. And if they don't agree, then they're hesitant or something. But the reality of it is mental health is much more complex than this. And why is the school board pushing this so hard?
So, yeah, Suzanne.
So I'm happy to address this a little bit. I'm a bit curious about putting this into a category of mental health or mental wellness. This is what we're talking about is identity with authentic identity with each individual and with our children being connected to themselves. And so in helping every individual, helping every child identify with themselves, whether it's in academic realm or artistic realm or sexual orientation realm or gender identity realm, whatever is their need to identify for their authentic being, our job as a parent is to help them find their own way. And the job of all school teachers and administrators is to help support that agenda as well, for each individual to feel safe, to be who they feel authentically are. So I recognize that Nadine may be feeling that this is an agenda that we're quote pushing, but I feel that this discussion is so beautifully positioned, because it's allowing us to talk openly about what used to be only spoken about with disparaging negative comments in cloakrooms. And now it's being open and people can talk about it and question it. Nobody's purporting to be a mental health counselor. Nobody's diagnosing anybody with gender dysphoria. Probably most of the people listening have never even heard the term gender dysphoria. So it's, I just really want to invite Nadine to recognize that this is an opportunity for people to share the possibility of thinking and recognizing other people's truths and other people's lived experience. And I just really want to say one thing, that in the last time I spoke, I ended my comment too quickly. I said I talked about the importance of having a discussion with other parents so that they can be open to possibility, not that we can change them or change their opinion. The idea is to invite people and help them to open their thinking. This is not about right or wrong. It's not right to be cisgender. It's not wrong to be trans. It's not right. Nothing is right or wrong. This is just the spectrum of possibility of being. And this conversation and these conversations and the invitation that schools are now moving into to broaden their thinking is about moving into greater possibilities of safety and openness.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think I saw Julie's hands before too. I forgot about the raise hand feature on Zoom. It's like I'm new here.
Yeah, I did want to comment, and then I started scrolling and I saw that this is part of a pretty long thread. I just want to reaffirm that, yes, like we are not specialists. Gender dysphoria is actually like a medical term that is used by physicians, by mental health experts to make a diagnosis when for the purpose of maybe accessing hormones or these kind of steps towards transitioning. I'm not actually sure that there is anything called a gender specialist. Like these are people who actually have other qualifications, like a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist or a physician. Like, these are people, these are the individuals who are actually making that judgment, right? I do think it's a little bit beyond the scope of this panel to be giving, this kind of advice to specific individuals with regards to like your kids. I feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. But to, reinforce Suzanne's point, like, I think what at the core we're just trying to move towards is, like a pluralistic conception of gender, right? Whereby like, once you recognize that not everybody fits into one of two categories neatly, it's very easy to realize that we all exist along this spectrum, right? And that what we're really trying to do is normalize what we would otherwise consider to be like exceptions or like abnormalities. So yeah, like I don't think any of us are here to make a diagnosis with regards to your children. I think that would be like kind of irresponsible. I think what we are advocating for is like creating these like safe spaces so that like people aren't victim of violence and abuse and harassment and discrimination, right? And this is part of a much bigger project of anti-oppression, of creating spaces like diverse spaces and gender balanced spaces and these kind of things. Like, this really is part of that larger project of creating a less discriminatory kind of world and a less oppressive world. So yeah, part of me kind of gets the pushback a little bit. But yeah, that's really, at least speaking for myself, like that's not why we do these kind of engagements, is to be like, yes, like everybody's kid should be trans. So yeah, I hope, Nadine, if you're still there, that quells some anxiety maybe.
I think back to both you, Julie, and Jordan at the beginning saying, elementary, high school, post-secondary maybe weren't so great. And I think maybe we may have a generation of kids who may say, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't horrible. I think that's probably what we can hope for, and maybe even better, and be more optimistic as well. Tracy, do we have another question from the audience?
We actually don't. I've looked in the chat too to see if we missed anything, and I think we're well in hand.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to do some closing discussion.
Yeah, I would for sure. I think this has been a lot for people to hear and to take in. But again, like I always like to think there might be someone who's listening now, or maybe someone who's going to find it later on through the great, I call them Dr. Google. Dr. Google can be male, female, non-binary, but I find that Dr. Google has different answers. And if we all showed up one day and we provided some support for someone, I think we would have earned our non-pay tonight. I'd like to go to the panelists though and see if you have some other words or final advice or even just thoughts or something maybe for the audience to think about going forward. So that was a really big, wide, open-ended, but if somebody wants to go first, I would love that. Or I will just call on you like I used to in school. Suzanne.
I'm happy to go first. And I actually just want to carry on a little bit of the sentiment that was presented by Nadine about questioning what all this is about and why we're speaking so much about this. And because if there weren't people, many people, I don't know what the stat is, but many people who were not so open to this and not so comfortable with it, we wouldn't be having these discussions, right? We wouldn't be saying, what do we need to do in schools to make a gender questioning or transitioning young person feel welcome, because it would just all be fluid. The fact of the matter is, there are lots of people who don't feel comfortable with this. And I think that the more we can be skillful in our communication and in our understanding of the topic and of people's responses and hesitations to this, and the more we can navigate that so that we can help people embrace this into a normalcy, the more we can do that and the more we can share those skills and strategies, I think the more normalized all this will be. And then in 5 years or maybe 10 years, we won't be having these discussions, right? Because we're no longer having these discussions, at least I don't think, about sexual orientation and if it's okay to, be heterosexual or homosexual. Like, we're not having those discussions as we did in the 70s. And so maybe in 10 years, we won't be having these discussions now about gender identity, but now we are. And so now it's our job, those of us who are taking this on publicly, to broaden the specter of knowledge and comfort.
Yes. Thank you, Suzanne. Absolutely.
Can I just jump in? There was a question that I think we can tie into the end too. Just came in, and I want to make sure we catch it. Sonia has a child that is born female and identifies as non-binary. At home, they go by their female name, and at school by a male name. And Sonia feels confused when she says, I can call her at, when she asks her child says that the parent can call her Abigail. Do you have any advice? So maybe you could kind of tie that in.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go to another member of the panel, but that Suzanne, if you've got something to add to that as well. So who's going to go next on final thoughts? Okay, Natasha, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question because, when I was thinking about family, when I was answering that question, part of that process too is the pronouns that have continued with identifying with their birth sex gender. And I've asked this question to my child. I've asked Agba, like, how do you feel if family members, maybe not so much immediate, or even immediate if it happens, how do you feel if they call you by this pronoun? And it's interesting perspective, and I also am learning this from Alpa, and Alpa feels that basically the response is those who are close to me, those who have seen me as a baby and has seen me growing up through this journey, to them, they understand that the family member may pronounce their other pronoun. They have no objection to that. They just know that that's the family and that's what happens. And they also know that they're also going through a learning journey as they are also going through their gender identity journey. So I do ask actually frequently to ALPA too, because it does happen, and that's generally like ALPA is actually quite comfortable. And I know every child's different and every circumstance is different. I'm just relating to what ALPA's experience, because I also had that same question, like, oh, like, with certain people, it's a certain pronoun, and with, maybe immediate family or kind of family friends in the outer circles, also they may use another pronoun that they're not going by. And they're okay with that. And I don't know if there's more to that. I just know at the present time, app was fine, and they realize that that it will happen with immediate circles, and that with time, things will change with that outside immediate family.
I'm just giving you one.
Sorry. Yeah, so I think for me, I'm just letting it be, and I'm just kind of going with what Alpa's saying. I am having conversations with them, and I think that's also paramount to have these conversations. And if they're fine, just like Alpa being fine, I think I'm just accepting that, and just having an open dialogue with Alpa, and yeah, that's my advice on that. And then kind of changing, kind of in a closing note very quickly, I just, hearing everyone's experience here and just thinking how there's this big there's the big generation gap, and hearing the experiences that some of you have gone through, and, seeing Atla go through this other journey where there is, a whole journey through the school system and society from where some of you have been to where Alpa is now. And, in a sense, I'm like, wow, like it has been definitely a struggle. And, Alpa right now is able to enter into a space where they feel comfortable and safe. And I know that could also change, right? Because things could change, people could change that come into the school environment. But I think that I believe there is open dialogue. I believe educators, administrators are aware and are making efforts for children, for students to become more comfortable and to be able to, display visually, audibly, however form of how they're feeling. And yeah, and I'm hoping that, as we move towards a better future, that just things become more normalized, to be quite honest. And I just want to thank you, each of you, for sharing your experiences, and somehow, some way, each of you have contributed to where ALPA is now. So I want to thank you all for that.
Oh, thank you. So well said, Natasha. It's conversations keep going, open heart, open mind. Okay, I've got Julie or Jordan. Somebody wants to unmute.
I can go.
Go ahead, Julie.
Did I cut someone off? No? Okay. I guess this, in the course of this discussion, I got really thrown back to pre-pandemic. If you'll recall, there was a pretty big kind of controversy over the current provincial government cutting the sex ed curriculum, or modifying the curriculum to essentially, take out a lot of these things from the curriculum, at least at an earlier age. And I recall 519 was very loud. Yeah, so long ago, eh? But I remember 519 was like very loud in kind of like combating this, and even taking part in some legal proceedings, and since then, from different people, I have kind of been, when I do hear about people pushing back against this, at least when it's not politicians, when it's kind of like, regular people who object to, a sex ed curriculum, I really just want to go back to reminding people that, like, once again, this is is all about like the safety of our young people, right? And even you don't even have to think about it in terms of like gender identity and sexual orientation. Like just think about it even in terms of bullying, right? And the reason why we are, advocating for this to be taught at an earlier age is so that we can get to the root of the problem sooner, and we don't have to, let people grow up in a world where they think it's okay to, harass people who don't fit a certain gender identity or don't look a certain way. Like that really is what's at the core of this, right? And it really isn't trying to change the whole world and to create this like new type of person, but like it really is more about just like creating safe spaces, right? And I didn't have the language for that when I was young. So now that I am in a position to understand how, not having that education is so detrimental, like that is really what, ruins lives, is like when you live for years thinking that, you're a bad person, don't belong, like that's where the damage is done. It's not done by, telling people to respect other people's, dignity and rights. Like that never hurt anybody, right? And that really is kind of what we're going for, I think, is, just creating this culture of not just like anti-homophobia and transphobia, but like creating a culture where like of anti-oppression and free of discrimination, harassment, and all of these things. So yeah, I'm not sure that there are too many people who are pushing back against the sex ed curriculum, anymore. But maybe if you do encounter this, maybe these are some pieces of 2 cents that you can consider.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks so much, Julie. Okay, Jordan?
Yeah, sure. Julie, I think that's really amazing that you brought that up, the whole sex curriculum piece of it, because it's so important that this is taught from a very young age. And the saddest thing that I ever heard was actually, there was not the saddest thing, but one of the saddest things that I've heard. I did a workshop on how to support trans youth, trans kids in schools. And there was a teacher who emailed me later. I gave out my email so they could contact me if they needed anything or had questions. And they emailed me saying that there was a kindergarten kid at their school who didn't want to come to school anymore because they had a trans parent, and the curriculum wasn't supporting this trans, didn't talk about anything about LGBTQ or anything about trans rights, anything about trans language, or everything was binary. And so all they're learning from up until kindergarten was about inclusivity and about like just loving their trans dad. And then they got to school, and for the first year of their life, they're like, oh, this is what it's like out there. And they didn't want to go to school anymore. So imagine a kid who's 4 or 5 years old and wants to drop out of school because they don't see that their family exists in school. And it's funny because I've heard a lot of parents, not a lot of parents, but I've heard parents at different schools who will say they don't want to take part in the sex ed curriculum, or they do have pushback against it. And when I tell them that story, then they start to see things in a different way. And they understand that the importance of it and what we're striving for. Because yeah, it's as you said, Leslie, it's really sad when a kid who's in kindergarten doesn't want to be in school. And that's the reason, is they don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like there's a place for their family there. And we're talking about, there's kids who are trans, there's kids who are non-binary, who are gender variant, there's kids with trans parents. There's kids who, this is their lives, this is their, and it, like, we need to make sure that they feel accepted, not in grade 7 when they haven't learned about it for 6 or 7 years, and then there's all of a sudden learning about trans people as if we don't exist. No, they need to learn about it from day one, from the day they enter school, and that needs to be supported all from kindergarten all the way up until graduation, grade 12. And I think this anti-oppressive lens that Julie was talking about, it's really important. Like, intersectionality is a huge piece. Having role models and all the things that we talked about today, that's why we're pushing it, because it's our responsibility as teachers, as administrators, as leaders, to make sure that our kids and our communities are safe. And that's the importance of this. So I think it's really amazing that everyone's here to share their stories and feel vulnerable. And like, we don't have all the answers. We don't, like, we can only share our own experiences. We're not experts. We've just, like, speaking for myself, I'm not an expert. I've lived this life, and I know that it was hard for me not being out as trans. And I think if we can create safer spaces in schools for kids, then that would be amazing, so that kids can feel comfortable to be themselves, and our community members can too. So that's what we're striving for. But as was mentioned earlier as well, your kids best, and reach out. There's lots of supports out there, lots of resources shared, and we're just telling you our own experiences and trying to help and support. So thank you everyone for coming, and thanks to everyone who shared.
Yeah, it's got to be our goal, right? To make sure that kids are safe and that they feel welcomed and honored and respected. And, as a union, people will say, well, you're just keeping your members safe. Well, no, actually, we're trying to improve workplaces so that everybody is safe and so that we can ensure safety for everybody. And my mind goes off in different directions, but as we were sitting here talking, and especially when Julie was talking at the end, listening and taking action, I was reminded of this commercial. It's a video, a Heineken ad, but it's about 5 minutes long. And I'm going to put the link in here. And before you log off, everybody just click on it. And it's called Worlds Apart. And it actually does exactly what we're talking about. You just see things differently, and I think that's what we have to do, is we have to see things again, open heart, open mind, see things differently, and approach things from a really open perspective, and be willing to change your mind about something. Be willing, and that takes vulnerability to say, you know what, I used to think this, but I don't anymore. And it might be because of a conversation that you had, or someone that you met, or an impact somewhere. And I think that's really what's important to do. So I can't thank the panelists enough for all that they've done and shared. And I know that you will probably be continuing on your advocacy, and I look forward to our paths crossing again at some point in time. We've had some questions about more of these types of events. We do have another coming up in August, but I think Tracy and I are still working on, or Tracy's working on the topic still, but stay tuned. We may have your email address, so you may hear from us. And I just thank you all for being here and for sticking around as well to the end. This was really, really a strong conversation, and thank you for all being a part of it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.